The very first WCW Uncensored pay-per-view aired in 1995 with the promise of the show being unsanctioned, unauthorized, unbelievable, and, of course, uncensored. The idea behind Uncensored was to present WCW wrestling in a way that fans had never seen before, with the majority of matches having different stipulations, most of which fell into no disqualification, anything goes territory. One problem though, and one pretty big problem at that, WCW were also trying to become more family friendly, and to do that, a strict no blood policy was put in place. The question is painfully obvious: why have a pay-per-view that implies, even in its name, that the show will be extreme and uncensored when your company is also making an effort to tone down violence? If fans expected to see a WCW version of ECW by purchasing the Uncensored show, then they would have been very disappointed. The show was uncensored in name, and that's about it. All you have to do is watch the Nasty Boys vs Harlem Heat Falls Count Anywhere match, and you'll see four guys trying to work around this family-friendly content policy, while also desperately trying to give fans what they paid for, and it turns out pretty bad as a result. The opening match of Uncensored though, the Blacktop Bully vs Dustin Rhodes King of the Road match, actually wasn't uncensored at all. It was a pre-taped match that was very, very censored, seeing as the no blood rule was broken and both men bladed during the bout, which also led to the competitors and the agent involved in the match getting fired. What we'll do today is look at the King of the Road match, and then we'll talk about the ramifications afterwards. It's a baffling story for sure. So, how did the King of the Road match come to be? What was the build-up, and why did Blacktop Bully and Dustin Rhodes fight on an 18-wheeler? It all began back in 1994 when Blacktop Bully began showing up at WCW shows. Fans would know Bully better by his real name, Barry Dorso, or Smash of Demolition, or even the Repo Man. And Barry made his WCW debut by sitting in the audience at TV shows where he distracted babyfaces during matches, one of which being Dustin Rhodes. Barry and Dustin got in a confrontation during the 26th of November 1994 episode of WCW Saturday Night, and Barry ended up getting arrested for putting his hands on a wrestler. The following week, Dustin apologised for getting all worked up. On the 10th of December episode of Saturday Night, Colonel Robert Parker and Ming paid a visit to the police station where Parker wanted to pay Barry's bail. Barry was given the name Blacktop Bully here, and because Bully not only caused problems at WCW shows, but he also wouldn't pull over when speeding in his big rig, the bail was set at $75,000, money that the Colonel didn't have. Parker promised he would get Bully out of the slammer on one condition: Bully would have to pretty much become a henchman for the Colonel, a member of the Stud Stable, and Parker said he'd raise the money and come back to get Blacktop Bully out of jail if Bully would help Parker in return. The following week, the Colonel came back with the money, and after making Blacktop sweat it out a little, the bond was paid, and Bully was free from his prison cell and very eager to get his hands on Dustin Rhodes. Robert Parker surprised Bully by bringing his flatbed truck to the police station. The two men left in the 18-wheeler, and it looked like poor Ming had to get a taxi home. Blacktop Bully then had a match on WCW Saturday Night the following week against Larry Santo, and of course Bully won the match. After the bout, he cut a promo with Parker where he said he'd been writing to WCW for years trying to get a job, but the front office said he was too brutal and too violent. Thanks to Colonel Robert Parker, Blacktop Bully now has a job in WCW, and because Parker got Bully out of jail, he promises to do anything the Colonel wants him to do when it comes to hurting people in the ring. From here, Bully went on a winning streak on WCW programming, leading up to Super Brawl 5 where Bully vs Dustin Rhodes would take place live on pay-per-view. The match failed to excite fans. Much of Bully's offense was based on punches, kicks and clotheslines and nothing much else. Bully also fought from underneath for the first portion of the match, which was really strange seeing as he was supposed to be, a bully who was too violent for WCW. It was a slow matchup that didn't go down well inside the arena. It was met with silence, and the audience only got excited when Dustin suplexed Robert Parker into the ring due to his constant interference. In the end, Blacktop Bully won the match thanks to the Colonel, and this meant the rivalry would continue into the next pay-per-view, WCW Uncensored. On the 25th of February 1995 episode of Saturday Night, while the Blacktop Bully destroyed job guy Larry McMahon, Tony Schiavone announced that the Bully would face Dustin Rhodes in a King of the Road match, a match that would take place in the back of Bully's 18-wheel truck. After the match, Blacktop Bully said this, and keep all this in mind when we actually look at the King of the Road match a little later.
Dustin Rhodes, this is my match, because we're going to be in my home. Dustin Rhodes, you better be ready, because uncensored means there is no rules. We're in the back of my truck. I know every inch of it. There might be steel bars coming down. They're wooden planks. And the floor is solid steel. So when you hit your head on there, I can crush it with my boot. Well, I made Colonel Parker one promise. I was going to have your hide. That's exactly what I'm going to do in Tupelo, Mississippi. Do you understand what this is all about?
In the lead up to Uncensored, WCW said that the whole event is not sanctioned by the company, and WCW officials have completely washed their hands of the event. To add to the intrigue, Mean Gene would say during Control Center segments that this new pay-per-view is not allowed to air on regular television, and the only way the company could get around this was to put the show on pay-per-view. Die-hard fans would have noticed WCW toning down the violence and they wouldn't have fell for this, but casual fans could have easily been suckered in with the promise of an extreme pay-per-view held by World Championship Wrestling. But those fans who ordered the pay-per-view were greeted with the King of the Road match to start things off. And there you have it, it's an 18-wheeler driving down the road, two men fighting it out, or rather two men literally rolling around in the hay, while a production team drives alongside to record footage. Not only that, a helicopter is also used to catch footage, and the truck had security escorts in front and at the rear. To win the match, a competitor must climb up the front of the cage and blow a horn, and what can I say here that hasn't been said already? This was taped 5 days earlier in Atlanta, and the movement of the truck made it very difficult for the competitors to stand up. Both Bully and Dustin struggle to pull off any kind of wrestling moves, and when they do, the competitors have a nice stack of hay to cushion the blow. So much for Blacktop Bully's trailer with a cold steel floor. You have this kind of weird mix of very safe wrestling on the hay and legitimately dangerous moments when the wrestlers climb up the side of the trailer. And because this was all pre-taped, you'd think someone would say, look, this is bad, let's change it and have the truck stationary instead. But no, Uncensored opened up with this bout, and the King of the Road match would live on in infamy as one of the worst gimmick matches in WCW history. Bully begins choking Dustin with a rope, and it's here when Dustin decides to blade. Keep in mind that family-friendly policy that WCW was pushing at the time. The cameras cut away to helicopter footage and footage of the truck driver running a stop sign, and when we come back, we can see that Blacktop Bully has also decided to blade. A ton of heavy editing follows where we don't get to see too many close-up shots, and it made an already bad viewing experience even tougher to sit through. The cuts are frequent, the competitors start to teleport around the trailer, only returning to uncut footage when someone tries to pull off a wrestling move, but nothing at all looks good here. When the truck turns, the wrestlers have to stop what they're doing or they'll take a bump into the side of the caged container, and you can almost sense that both Barry and Dustin know that this thing is not going to come across well on TV. You're watching guys do their best to stand up in a moving vehicle, that's it. You get the odd bit of physicality, but everything just looks so difficult for the guys involved, and even though they were trying their best, they were in a situation here that they just couldn't win in. It's a bad match that ended up coming to an end when the Blacktop Bully, the baddest truck driver in America, managed to blow the horn to emerge victorious. WCW officials, the guys in charge, they should have been apologising to Barry and Dustin, but instead, Barry and Dustin got fired the very next day. The reason behind the firing seems simple enough. Dustin Rhodes, Barry Darsow and agent Mike Graham had broken the no blood policy, and because they bladed during the bout, action had to be taken. You'd be right in saying that if WCW didn't want blood on their pay-per-view, then they shouldn't have aired the pre-taped match. It wasn't live, so the company had a chance to erase the matchup. The problem there though is the fact that the bout was heavily advertised on WCW programming, so WCW had to show something. They opted for a heavily edited version of the match, but they couldn't completely avoid showing the competitors' faces after the blade jobs. I assumed that re-recording the match wasn't a possibility at all, due to timing, logistics and money, so they had to get something out of the footage they shot. Researching the firings online leads us down a bit of a rabbit hole, and it turns out that, allegedly, Eric Bischoff was ordered to cut $500,000 from WCW's budget in a short period of time, and he done this by firing Paul Roma for going into business for himself at Super Brawl 5 during his match with Alex Wright, and also by firing Dustin Rhodes, Bully, Mike Graham and eventually Harley Race. Now, this is online research here and it's Dave Meltzer stuff, so anything goes and bullshit is aplenty, but the timing of these firings is quite the coincidence. We will come back to this later and hear what Eric Bischoff had to say on the matter. Bischoff did talk about the King of the Road match a little on his 83 Weeks podcast, however, and we learned quite a bit here by listening to what Eric had to say. First of all, Eric admitted that the wrestling was bad inside the vehicle, but he liked the idea of the match and he liked how out of the box it was. In terms of the reputation the match has, Eric thinks it isn't nearly as bad as what people make it out to be, and a lot of that comes down to how different the match was. In a way, I agree with Eric. Playing it safe doesn't get people talking and you have to try something different every now and then. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Eric admits that the action that took place during the King of the Road match wasn't good, but Kevin Sullivan's general idea for the match was a good one. It just wasn't executed well on TV. In terms of fans criticising the match, Eric says fans are well within their rights to do so. But in terms of the Uncensored pay-per-view and what the goals were for that show, he's not ashamed that WCW tried something that had never been done before. Also, according to those who saw the whole match and those who filmed the match on location, the original King of the Road bout, the unedited version, was supposedly way better than what we saw on pay-per-view, and the edit job seriously hurt what was actually a decent match. The fact that all we saw were two guys stumbling around was thanks to the real good stuff having to get removed. In regards to the firings, it was reported that Mike Graham brought the blades to location and Graham gave Dustin and Darso the thumbs up to get some colour. Graham was fired for giving the go-ahead. Rhodes and Darso were fired because they should have known better. But the real kicker here is the fact that Hulk Hogan bladed 2 weeks prior during a match against Vader in Chicago, and there was no punishment handed to the Hulkster. This is from Eric's 83 Weeks podcast.
Yeah, I did fire all three of them. It had nothing to do with Chicago. I don't even know what the fuck that was about. I'd have to go back and learn more about that. But there was a policy in place. I was angry. I was aware that, because everybody was aware. I mean, I held a meeting. I said, we're not doing this anymore. Here's why we're not doing this anymore. Here's what's going to happen if it happens by accident, because sometimes these things do happen in the ring. I mean, when it came to blood, and a lot of this had to do with, by the way, the pressure that WWF was putting on us at that time, and letters that Vince McMahon would write to Ted Turner and all that kind of shit. So there was this constant back and forth. The only time I ever heard from the North Tower or Bill Shaw was with regard to blood. That was the only time. And we would kind of seesaw back and forth, just like Vince McMahon would seesaw. He'd come out and condemn us for it, bury Ted Turner and write his congressman and all, Health and Human Services, and try to get politicians on board. Whatever he could do to try to stop our momentum or to throw us off of our momentum, he did. And then he turned around and do the same thing a couple months later. So there was such a hypocrisy when it came to the blood issue and whether or not we should or shouldn't. But the fact remains, I made it clear, can't do it anymore. And then they went out and did it. And at that time, and again, younger, I wasn't as experienced then as I would have been 5 or 10 years later. But at the time, I just got hot. I said, fuck it. And in this particular case, because there was a mandate, not just from Bill Shaw, but from Turner Corporate, I felt I had to do something. And rather than single any one person out, I just kind of cleared the room.
In the same episode of 83 Weeks, Eric talked about what could have happened if Dustin Rhodes stayed with WCW. After Dustin was fired, he went to the WWF and the Goldust character was born, but Eric said there would have been a good possibility that Dustin would have teamed up with Sting during the WCW vs NWO war during 1996 and beyond. Eric also made it clear that Dustin would have been more of a co-star than the actual main event during the blockbuster rivalry. So that's something to think about for sure. The natural Dustin Rhodes representing the good guys in the fight against the New World Order. But in regards to the firings after the King of the Road match, everything reported is pretty much true. There was a policy in place, that policy wasn't adhered to, and those involved paid the consequences. In regards to the budget cuts and Eric Bischoff trying to save $500,000, Eric said the reports were nothing more than Dave Meltzer making up theories in his head to sell his dirt sheet. Regarding the report that Eric fired Dustin, Darso and others to save WCW money, Bischoff said this.
Well, the first person you heard hypothesize about that was Dave Meltzer, and I'm sure that by the time Dustin Rhodes got around to writing his book, he probably had heard that narrative as well. And again, I don't want to spend any more time or energy going off on Dave Meltzer, but it wasn't true. And to suggest that, I mean, it's great, it's very creative to suggest that the reason I made the decision I made was to save money for somebody else. That makes my decision, it diminishes the decision. It certainly takes emphasis off of why the decision had to be made. It does a lot of things, but mostly it helps create a narrative that Dave consistently had been making throughout this entire period of time. Whenever possible, take a shot, diminish Hogan, diminish WCW, diminish the talent, diminish it in any smart-ass way that you can. That was his agenda. And it wasn't true. It had nothing to do with money. It had everything to do with me standing up in front of a bunch of people telling them not to do something and having them do it, which is why I fired everybody. And it's why, by the way, I let everybody know, sit down, take the kick in the balls. It'll be okay soon. And they all got hired back. So fuck it. And Dave Meltzer.
So there you have it. Eric said it was more about letting the guys know who was in charge. He's right too about bringing everyone back. Everyone was brought back eventually, with Darso getting rehired in October of 97 and Goldust coming back to do the whole 7 gimmick under Vince Russo. Mike Graham returned too in a backstage capacity. As for the Paul Roma and Harley Race firings, Bischoff didn't bring those up while talking about the King of the Road match. Eric did talk about Roma's firing in his Super Brawl 5 episode, but he said he couldn't remember the reasons why Roma was let go. The King of the Road match is a bad viewing experience, to me anyway. Uncensored was a new concept, and to kick things off with a heavily edited match where we saw 2 guys fall around a moving truck wasn't exactly the greatest decision. I do appreciate the company trying something new, but it's baffling to me that the office would watch the edited version and decide that it was suitable for pay-per-view. Even if they could have shown a few clips of the truck on the road and then have both guys end the match in the ring or something, that could have worked. But Dustin and Bully were already fired by the time King of the Road made it to TV. Sometimes things work, sometimes they don't. This didn't work, and the fact that guys got fired afterwards makes the whole thing all the more disappointing. But that's going to do it for today. If there's any other bad WCW gimmick matches you'd like me to cover, please let me know in the comments. I've just noticed that I've covered quite a few already, so might as well get as many done as possible so we have a nice little mini series going on. But yeah, thanks for watching guys, I hope you enjoyed this one, and take care.
Now they call him the natural. He's naturalist from B. They call him the natural. It just comes naturally. He's the son of a son, the son of a gun. The horse doing the rodeo bulldog, that's a natural one. Now they call him the natural. He's naturalist from B. They call him the natural. It just comes naturally. He's the son of a son and son of bulldog, that's a natural one.